What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
So one of the things that I love so much about DC Rebirth is that it's really going back to like the roots of what made a lot of these characters so popular. And it's really kind of going back in a lot of ways as far back as the pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths roots when it came to these characters. And this is more so than when it comes to the Titans themselves. And the reason why I say that is because remember, in the previous video we talked about where it was Titans Volume 1, and even during, Titans Rebirth, we had talked about how in a lot of ways, the Titans themselves were rooted in the Teen Titans. The Teen Titans go all the way back to before Crisis on Infinite Earths. They were basically the sidekicks of DC's superhero lineup coming together as a team and then fighting different villains. And it was a great way for DC to kind of, give teenagers their own little piece of the pie. It was a great way for them to give them their own little niche and say, hey, this book was made just for you. You can read anything else that you want to, but this book was written exclusively for you. It's not designed for adults. And because of that, teens loved the Teen Titans, and it became a mainstay. In fact, there was a point in DC Comics landscape when the Teen Titans were actually the highest selling publication they had. They outsold everything else, including Justice League, Superman, Batman, and that's, the Justice League, Superman, and Batman at the height of their popularity. That just shows you really how popular this team was. But as time progressed and the Teen Titans went through various iterations and DC started to move into the newer and darker landscape of the post-Crisis on Infinite Earths, after the death of Gwen Stacy in 1971, going into the whole, post-Dark Knight Returns era of comic books, the original Teen Titans went away and they were transformed or kind of brought back into the Titans. The problem with this was that when DC launched the New 52, the Titans were nowhere to be seen with the exception of Titans Hunt. All you had was just the newest version of Teen Titans, and fans didn't really care for that team too much because it was so far removed from the team that they were familiar with, and it really left out a lot of the members that they had come to identify with. And so because of this, with regards to this one shot, and really with the first volume of Teen Titans, the first story arc of Titans in DC Comics, it's a return to familiarity. Now the cool thing about this is Dan Abnett sits down and says, okay guys, here's the deal. We basically have the Titans fighting some guy. Now in normal circumstances, we could just kind of write this off and just say, hey, they're just fighting a guy with metahuman powers. But the cool thing about this is, again, Dan Abnett is setting things up. He's basically saying, hey, this guy basically got metahuman powers for the first time. Someone gave them to him. And the way we know this is because of the kind of things he's saying, hey, I've got meta stuff. He doesn't really know what his powers are called or what the technical term is. He's talking about how he can grow to a huge size. He even refers to the Titans as the Justice League. Now, the reason why we know this guy's brand new to the scene is that historically speaking in DC Comics, it's kind of like this unwritten rule. And even in Marvel Comics, it's kind of this unwritten rule that when a new legitimate villain, pops up onto the scene, that is to say, a bad guy that's probably going to be a mainstay for a little while, he knows who all the superhero teams are, or she knows who all the superhero teams are. They know who the X-Men are, they know who the Avengers are, that kind of thing. It's just an unwritten rule. It's written that way for the sake of us having to really question the suspension of disbelief. We just kind of take it as an absolute, he knows who they are. The fact that this guy has no idea who the Titans are tells us that this guy's relatively new to the superhero community. The Titans are somewhat of a new reformation, but the idea is that they're closely intertwined with the Justice League. They're closely intertwined with some of the most notable superheroes in DC Comics. And so most everybody knows who they are. Now, something else that I also want you to take note of here is there's a lot of banter back and forth between Roy Harper and Donna Troy. Again, Donna Troy is a character that has a very, very confusing history, but she was in a lot of ways tied to the origin of Wonder Woman. And while she has changed over the years, she is part and parcel very similar to Wonder Woman in terms of how she fights, how she looks, so on and so forth. As far as I can tell from the direction this story's going in, they're actually going to come back and create a definitive origin for her character. And so I don't want to touch on that too much. I actually want to have that discussion once they get around to her new origin, presuming that happens. If it doesn't, then we'll kind of touch on that later on. But one of the most interesting aspects of Donna Troy and Roy Harper is that for a long time, DC always had the two of them just kind of getting together. They were just one of these power couples, so to speak, in DC. It really goes all the way back to 1967 in a lot of ways with the original Teen Titans run. I mean, back then, the stories weren't nearly as adult oriented as they were later on down the line, but it was always something in comic books. Like in comics, you always have heroes that just pair up, that just come together. It's just, they all just kind of pair off and they go their own separate ways. And for Roy Harper and Donna Troy, it was always, the two of them kind of, will they, won't they, that sort of thing. They've had disastrous dates. And that's kind of the cool thing here is we basically get to see this, or I guess kind of relive this disastrous date between the two of them, but it comes out to be kind of romantic and it actually comes out to be pretty cute. But the other funny thing about this is what I love about Dan Abnett's writing, is that after they defeat this bad guy, they're all just kind of talking about what's going on, and Roy Harper's kind of being like the jerk of the team, which is one of the reasons why we love him so much. But the groups met with the arrival of Superman. And the reason why this is so cool is because this creates cohesiveness. I mean, when we sit down and we read, Justice League, or we read Superman, or we read Batman or something like that, so far in DC Rebirth, it's been all the teams taking care of problems on their own. It's been them just being like, hey, we can't call in the Justice League because we're busy. We see that in Green Lanterns all the time. Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz, one of them will be like, why don't we just call the Justice League? We're a member of the team. Why don't we just call them? And it's like, well, they're all off doing their own thing. In fact, there's been stories where heroes do contact the Justice League and everybody in the Justice League is busy. I think that was a Batman story, but it's just a way for DC to say, hey, here's their first story arcs. This is them just kind of focusing on their own. With Superman coming in, with Superman saying, hey, look, I heard about a commotion in New York. I showed up here, but you guys have everything already taken care of. It's cool because one is Superman sitting down and saying, hey, you guys are legit. You guys are a legit team. You guys are awesome. The other half of this is DC sitting down and saying, hey, Superman and the Justice League, they're not oblivious to everything that goes on. It's not like some team is fighting a villain and the Justice League just have no idea what's happening. Superman just kind of happened to be around and just saw what was going on, decided to step in, and then everything was over. But the other cool thing about this, and in truth, I think the best thing about this story is that we have two pre-New 52 characters. And what this story does, this is what I love about this. There's a lot of confusion out there. People ask me a lot about what's going on. How do we tie in Wally West and the pre-New 52 Superman with the New 52 right now? How do we reconcile those universes? I don't understand what's going on. Pre-New 52, New 52. I don't get everything that's going on here. This comic seems to set the stage for how all that's getting reconciled. And we'll get to that, once we cross that bridge. But the cool thing is that Superman recognizes Wally West. He knows who he is because remember, the pre-New 52 Superman sits down and he basically came from the pre-Flashpoint era. Flashpoint being the story that initiated DC's New 52 relaunch. Superman, this version comes before all that. This is the classic Superman that we all know and love. And so because of this, he's like, Wally, I know who you are. And so Wally has no idea who he is. Wally doesn't know what's going on with this guy. And so Wally basically races off. Now, this is when Dan Abnett kind of toys with us for a little bit. This is when Dan Abnett, plays a few games here and there. But the overall idea seems to be that the two of them basically just kind of race off. And it provides this really cool situation where it's like, who gets there first. Now, the cool thing is Superman basically says, you're faster than I remember, And so it's really kind of Superman, at least it seems to be him saying, hey, you're faster than I am. Now the funny thing about this too, is that Wally West is like, who are you? I don't know who you are. I don't know what's going on here. Now, this is where I say DC and Dan Abnett are kind of toying with this because the whole situation, what they're basically offering here, at least it seems to be what they're suggesting, is that when the New 52 first launched in 2011, it was a wholly new universe. Prior to the New 52, you had the DC line of comics, and then you had the Vertigo line of comics, which dealt with like angels, demons. That's where you found Lucifer, and that's where you really found the best stories of Constantine the Hellblazer. And then you had Wildstorm, which is a whole other imprint in and of itself. DC had the main publications, and then Vertigo and Wildstorm were really just kind of those that were intertwined with DC, and they would cross over. When the New 52 launched, all three of those publications were merged into one single universe, and so now it was all taking place at the same time. And because of that, it created this whole new 52 universe. Well, what seems to be happening here is Superman, between the conversation that Superman and Wally West are saying when they're talking about somebody going through an editing time, different things like that, what seems to be happening here is DC saying, no. They're going back, they're changing it and saying, okay, we said the New 52 was a new universe when we first launched it. That's not true. That's not what happened. What happened was the Flash, Barry Allen, went back in time, saved his mom's life, initiated the Flashpoint event, went back, kept himself from saving his mom's life, tried to set everything back to normal, and when he did, somebody stepped in and did something. Now, we're assuming it's Dr. Manhattan. We're taking the assumption here in DC Rebirth that between the time that Barry Allen did what he did in Flashpoint, the moment between everything started to go back to normal and the New 52 was launched, that Dr. Manhattan stepped in and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to edit. We're going to go through and start editing, the universe or something like that. We don't really know what it is that he did, but the end result is that because of his actions, we picked up with the New 52. Superheroes had just appeared for the very first time, that kind of thing. And so again, what seems to have actually happened, what Dan Abnett seems to be saying here is that the New 52 was created by Dr. Manhattan. Instead, what was supposed to happen was Barry Allen went back in time, saved his mom's life, basically initiated the Flashpoint universe, realized that he had screwed everything up, went back in time, stopped himself from saving his mom's life, and then everything was supposed to go back to normal. But instead, Dr. Manhattan stepped in, screwed stuff up. Now again, I'm just grabbing this from a few words here and there that these characters are saying. I may be entirely wrong about this. I could be wrong on so many levels, but that seems to be the direction things are going. And again, we won't really know until Jeff John writes Watchmen, until Dr. Manhattan is full on revealed in the DC, as part of DC Rebirth, until we see this massive, comic that just says, hey everybody, here's exactly what happened. Which, by the way, I am excited for whatever that story happens to be, whenever it gets released, because it will. I'm so excited for that. But the other cool thing about this is, keep in mind, this is why I say Dan Abnett is one of the best writers when it comes to Superman. Yeah, Kurt Swan had a 30-year run on Superman, but I think that Dan Abnett has a great take on the character. Wally West, the pre-New 52 Wally West, sits down and says, nothing's like I remember it. I mean, yeah, okay, if you remember me, that's cool. You know what I was like. You remember how things were. But he says, I don't remember, nothing's the way it was. Myself, Linda Park, who of course was his wife before the events of New 52, he says, this Linda Park doesn't know me. She doesn't know who I am. And Superman says, yeah, things are different for me than they are for you. I mean, I still have Lois Lane. I have a son. My personal life is intact. Everything that I knew before the New 52, when it came to Lois Lane, so on and so forth, that's all still there. But he says, for you, Wally West, you're basically starting over again. You're essentially starting brand new. But it's great because if Linda Park, as you know her now, her personality is exactly like the Linda Park that you knew before the New 52 happened. Because remember, Wally West knows about Barry Allen. I don't believe that Superman knows about the Flashpoint event. But when he says, everything that you knew before all that, if that Linda Park is the exact same, if their personalities are the same, the only difference is she doesn't know who you are, then it's time to fight for that. It's time to fight for the life that you want and be happy. And that's the coolest thing about this. That's the coolest thing about Superman, because what he's doing, he's imparting these old man Superman words of wisdom, where he's basically saying life's too short to not be happy. And Wally West knows this. Wally West should know this, because remember, the entire first story arc of the Titans was Wally West figuring out why everyone didn't know he existed. Of course, we knew it was the villain Abracadabra, who basically, used his powers to wipe Wally West from the minds of the world. But for Wally West, he should know, because he's basically been a dead man for the entirety of the New 52's run so far. He wasn't dead, per se, but the world didn't know he was there, and so he might as well have been dead. And so because of that, he should have a better idea, better than most, about how precious and how valuable life is. And so he should know that if he cares about this version of Linda Park, he's got to go fight for that. He's got to go step out and say, look, you don't know me. I know you're not the Linda Park that I knew. You don't know me, but let's go out and get dinner sometime. That's what should happen. That's exactly how it should play out. And that's how it did play out. And that's why it works so well, is because it's Superman giving these little pieces of advice to a superhero that we've all come to know and love. Now, transitioning over to Donna Troy, this is why I say things get kind of cool here, because they're basically in Midtown Manhattan and they're at a diner. The way this originally played out, at least as far as I can tell, if I'm correct about this, the way it originally played out with Donna Troy and Roy Harper, the first date they went on was disastrous because the Aeromobile, the Aero car that Roy Harper was driving was basically jacked. Somebody jacked the car that he was driving on. It kind of led to, some funny situations in terms of the two of them getting together, sharing a kiss, that kind of thing. But this very much seems to be the case. It really seems to be Dan Abnett sitting down and saying, these two are getting together. Now, the reason why this works so well is because Roy Harper, man, he's spitting some mad game on her. Like he's he's spitting some mad game on Donna Troy. But it also works out because Roy Harper's a guy who's been through some things. When it comes to his character, assuming that what we believe is correct, with the fact that his memories have been altered, that eventually his memories will be restored, and he'll be like, I remember my whole life, with all that kind of good stuff. He's been through a lot of things. Donna Troy is the exact same way. These two are basically hard asses. They're about as tough as it gets. And to see the two of them just kind of let their guard down, even if it's only for a night, and Roy Harper just starts spitting game and he starts acting, cute, and he's flirting with Donna Troy, it works out because we know the two of them are going to start getting together now. Now, the other half of this is, again, the two of them are really talking about Donna Troy's past. They're talking about her past life, talking about her really, in a lot of ways, confusion about where she comes from, what her origin story is, so on. So it really seems to be Dan Abnett kind of dancing around this idea that, yes, we'll get into the origin of Donna Troy somewhere along the line. But again, he sets the stage for what's to come when we're basically introduced to a guy named Simon. Now, Simon, as far as I can tell, is a wholly new creation by Dan Abnett. He's never existed before, but he's basically running a company called Meta Solutions. And the idea seems to be that they're basically giving metahuman powers to normal people, or waking up metahuman powers that they already have. Which one it is, I'm not 100% sure. The way that people are talking here, the way this couple is talking anyway, they're talking about waking up metahuman powers. And so it may be that Metahuman Solutions or Meta Solutions is saying, hey, you all have powers, come here and we'll wake them up. Whereas in truth, they're actually just giving them powers they didn't have before. But it really seems to be setting the stage for, hey, what are the Titans going to do against a company that's basically basically just giving out meta powers to people, with no real question on whether they deserve them or not. But the way that Dan Abnett basically wraps this issue up is beautifully done, in the sense that we essentially just pick up with a revelation that Titan's Tower is being recreated. The Titan's Tower has been remade. Now, the reason why this is so cool is because Titan's Tower is like the Titans' own version of the Justice League Watchtower. It's their own little base of operations. Because at this point, they've just kind of been operating out of an apartment building, which, as cool as that may be, everybody's just kind of being roommates, living in the same space and just operating out of an apartment building. In truth, we really need them to have their own base of operations, because what it does is it gives legitimacy. It says, okay, they're not some ramshackle team now. They're not just kind of living on a shoestring. This team is a legitimate, tried and true superhero team. They've arrived. They are here now. And it's cool, because it basically means that a lot of the Titans mythos, really a lot of like the Teen Titans mythos, is really starting to come back. It's really starting to really reform itself, and it's starting to structure to the point in DC Rebirth where a lot of the things that we all knew before the New 52 are really starting to become more cohesive. They're really starting to become solid again. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Court. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.